to go along with the main reflection about humanity, I thought I'd say a little bit more about the Genesis 1 and 2 stories, which I've done in another clip, but also the idea of humans as being part of the family of life. It's a particular interest of mine. I put together this ridiculously big thesis, Biocentric Theology, Christianity celebrating humans as an ephemeral part of life, not the centre of it. I turned that into a rather smaller book, which says something like Worshipping Evolution's God. What does it mean to know about our evolutionary origins and the evolution that's continuing and our future as well as Christians whose story of origins has tended to be taken from Genesis 1 and 2 in the past? Well, very briefly, there's a few significant differences between the two origin stories. In Genesis 1, of course, we have humans being created in the image of God, separate and distinct from other species, and humans given dominion of the earth. What we've learnt from evolution and ecology is that it's actually the microbes, and then probably after them the plants, which are exercising dominion on Earth. They're the ones that are in control. And of course, for most of the planet's history, humans haven't even been here. The other idea that we are in the image of God with this kind of absolute separation from other species has also been revised significantly now that we understand that all life has evolved from single ancestors somewhere in the past. So there's no biological basis on which to say that we are completely distinct from other creatures. Many of the qualities of humans that we've tried to use to give evidence that we are in the image of God and other creatures aren't, have actually been shown in more recent times to be found in other animals to some extent as well. And of course we have to remember the other species of humans that have gone extinct in the last 2 million to 50,000 years. We're not even the only species of human that's ever existed here. Another difference, of course, is that in the Genesis 2 story, we have the creation of Adam first, and then all the animals, and then finally Eve. In the first story, the 6-day creation story in Genesis 1, pretty much everything happens in a week and humans are around for the whole story. So in both of those cases, it's not hard for us to be the main players, the centre of the story, the ones who have been here pretty much the whole time. Again, now we know that it's been billions of years from the first life on Earth to humanity arriving, and humans will probably disappear long before life on Earth is finished. We're not the whole story of the relationship between God and life. The Genesis 2 and 3 cycle also has things backwards compared to the story of evolution. In that story, God creates a perfect world where everything is wonderful, and then of course humans, either metaphorically or literally, ruin it by eating the fruit. Everything bad in the world then is humans' fault. All of the diseases, even things like storms and volcanoes, were understood by Wesley to be our fault. In evolution, we know that actually pain and death have been part of life for millions of years before human beings ever came along. They're not our fault. There was no perfect creation that we have ruined. So we need to think, what does it mean to be Christians affirming that actually death is a part of life? Pain has been here long before humans came along, and it actually helps protect us in its best moments. Paul tells the story of the first Adam who ruined the world, and our salvation through the second Adam who's going to restore all things. But if the first Adam didn't ruin the world, then what is the point of the second Adam? What does Jesus mean to Christians whose origin stories come from the story of evolution, not from creation? Well, there's no time in a couple of minute clip to share that with you. You can read Worshipping Evolution's God if you like, where I've had a bit of a go at answering that, or the thesis where I tried to answer it even more. But I will tell you a couple of things. One is that whatever our original sin means, it doesn't mean what the church has understood it to mean in the past. The fall isn't something that's happened as a historical event where we've ruined the world, although we might see ourselves as doing that now. We are creating the 7th mass extinction event on the planet as human beings. Maybe this is the fall that we are creating, or at least most of us, because of course many humans are suffering as much as some humans are causing the problem. There are other insights that we can learn from the evolutionary sciences. We know, for example, that for most of our history as humans, we've actually been hunter-gatherers in small tribes where people more or less stayed in the same groups, up to 200 people. Everyone knew each other and we had no possessions to worry about. Our brains evolved in that kind of environment. So the fact that we struggle now and that we sin now, that we live in such a different environment, should be no surprise to us. What were the original conditions that humans lived in? What were the original needs that we had that we need to try to meet through the good news of the gospel? Well, they were the need for bonding and autonomy to be looked after. The need for bonding to be looked after. The need for autonomy to be able to make a meaningful contribution to the group so that you were valued. And the need for meaning, to be able to make sense of that pull between wanting to be cared for and nurtured as an infant and wanting to contribute as an adult. They are our original needs: bonding, autonomy, and meaning. Also, we know that we've inherited our body plans and even our brains from our ancestors. Inside our brain, we can imagine the metaphor, which is actually based strongly in reality, that we have a very primitive core of our brain which keeps our basic body functions going. We have a kind of reptilian component which reacts instantly to danger. We have an early mammalian component, the part that first let life on Earth dream, the part that's responsible for emotions. And then we have a more integrated and connected part, which humans have, as far as we know on this planet, the most developed of all, which lets us plan for the future, which lets us see ourselves as being part of something bigger than just us, which lets us contemplate God and concepts like love and commitment and loyalty. But all of those parts of our brain are working together to keep us alive, and when they're out of sync, we can act out in all kinds of ways that aren't actually helpful anymore, ways that we would call sin. Paul's feeling that his body was sometimes controlled by something outside him, which Christians have often called the devil and understood as a personal force, actually I think has more to do with what's going on in our brains. If we can understand these thoughts and emotions and all of the negative things that we experience as actually being part of us that we can work on instead of some external evil force controlling us, I think we'll be a lot better placed to do something about it. Well, that's just a few ideas about what it means for Christians to understand themselves as part of an evolutionary process instead of a specially and uniquely created people. What that means for Jesus, for the gospel, his death and so on, is fascinating and probably left for another tape. But I will say briefly that I notice for myself when I read the Gospels, there's a lot more coherence between the Gospel portraits of Jesus and what I've come to think and understand about him through the story of evolution than there is between the Gospel portraits and some of the ways that we have traditionally understood Jesus over the last couple of thousand years.